So let's get this quiz going. All right. SQL part 2. According to the diagram below, the artwork table has what kind of relationship to the style table? Yeah, so this is many to one because you can have many different artworks that have the same style. And it can be hard to get your head around, and that's actually the trick here is according to the diagram. I would argue that really what we want to develop with this, possibly if we can in the next couple classes, is a many to many relationship, because you can have artworks that have more than one style applied to them. But the diagram indicated that you could have multiple artworks for one style. So this is something that we're going to be talking about more kind of in chapter 18, which is the next 2 classes on Thursday and Monday. So we'll definitely be diving into this, and it will help everybody kind of get a more concrete understanding of how that works. Okay. When 2 tables have a one-to-many relationship, the many table is the one where a foreign key should be set. True or false? Yeah, so that's true. Yeah, if you remember in our artwork example, the artwork table is the one that had foreign keys set for style and artist and all those things in our last class, because each of those has a primary key, and in the artwork table, that is what corresponds to the foreign key. So once we kind of start getting into that in the next couple of classes, it'll help to kind of see how these things get labeled so that Hibernate understands how to make the tables in the database. Cool. All right. What is the term for a query that has been nested inside another query? Yeah, I may or may not have been a little punchy when I wrote this quiz a few nights ago. So yeah, subquery is the term. All right, true or false? It is not possible to have more than one join in a query unless the union keyword is used. Yeah, that's false. If you remember from the last class, both in the lecture and then also in your studio, you had to use multiple inner joins to connect a bunch of tables to get all the way from one table over here and relate through the tables to another table over here. And you could actually just kind of, I think I called it daisy chaining, is in some cases that's an apt metaphor. Yeah, so that's false. Union actually can only be done when you have 2 tables that have the same columns. And in cases where you have completely different columns, but you need to try to correlate data, that's when you use multiple joins. Okay, Knobs has moved into the lead. Multi-select. How many inner join statements are needed to provide results showing the artist's names and their style of art, according to what you're about to see? Okay, good. Yeah, most of you got it. So it's 2 because if you look at this, artist has the names and style has the style, right? And both of them are connected through this artwork table. So to get from one to the other, you just have to go from here to here and then from here to here. So you can do a join on artist and artwork and do a join on artwork and style, and that will connect artist to style. Cool. All right. We have 2 more questions. What is the correct syntax for storing a user ID in a variable in MySQL? This was not in your book, but it was in lecture. Good. Yeah. So the @ symbol is used to actually, create a variable name that can then be used as a variable in your queries. Great. Brad moves into the lead. All right. True or false? Count with a column name is valid syntax for returning a total or subtotal in a MySQL query. True. Yep. It can be used, you can just list it among all of the things that you want to see, all the column things, and it will be returned for you. Great. Okay, so let's do our podium. In 3rd place, we have Knobs. Great job, Knobs. M in 2nd place, and Brad snuck in towards the end there to 1st place. Nicely done. Really. The runners up. Awesome. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned, Colin is in a meeting with TAs tonight for the first part of class. So we're just going to be going straight into the lecture. I do have a couple announcements, but we'll kind of get right into this. So we're talking about object relational mapping, 3 classes. Tonight's the first one, and then on Thursday and Monday, we'll do the other 2 parts, which is chapter 18 kind of divided up. Okay, so yeah, typical, the way we're doing things now, we'll do announcements, do lecture. You guys will go to studio for the rest of class, and I will have the studio review, which is already recorded. I'll have that up for you by the end of class. So announcements, graded assignment 4 is available. As we are starting to discuss object relational mapping tonight in the next 2 classes, that's going to give you everything you need to know to complete it. But all graded assignments are due that night, the last night of class, which is a catch-up class, not a lecture class. And Colin will have more of the particulars on exactly how all that works in terms of it being a drop deadline to get to Unit 3. So the other thing was the call for art. You may have seen the announcement I made in the announcements channel where I am going to, I'm flipping this instructional example that I've got, this little project with this art gallery, to something that actually is showcasing your work. So those of you who want to share your work, if you haven't already seen it, take a look at that announcement in Slack, and you can DM me with the information because I still have quite a lot of it that it will be incorporated as we make our project a little more complex over the next couple of classes. Things are actually still going to be pretty simple tonight. Okay, so we're going to talk about this, connecting a Spring app to a database. And there's one thing that I wanted to kind of talk about with this project of mine, just before we kind of get into all of the topics. I just want to make sure I cover this because I'm afraid I'm going to forget. I don't want you to get lost. I made an executive decision, because this has been a work in progress. I've been making it up as I go along, to get rid of the word collection, as you know, because it's a little bit ambiguous with the way that Java has a class called collection, and collections it has two. So I've decided to change everything to where it just talks about artwork. So we have an artwork controller, we have artwork data. The model, of course, is still artwork, but like where the templates are organized, everything is organized in a folder called artworks. So you'll kind of see now that that word collection has kind of gone away in terms of the way all the naming is done of the files and classes and things. And then I also had tweaked a couple of other things in the UI that I'm going to talk about when I bring it up. Actually, I can go ahead and bring it up. Let's get this, it looks like it is started. Let me just restart just to make sure. Okay. I want to kind of give you guys a baseline for where this thing is. Oh yeah, it's too soon. No, there we go. Okay, so we have this, you know, you've seen this before, it's our gallery. I realized that this project was having an identity crisis because I'm a front-end engineer primarily, and I tend to think about the outside user. And really everything we're doing in this unit is focusing on data management. And so it's really kind of like, you've noticed, I'm sure already, your coding events, your graded assignments with the job boards, like it's all very much geared toward managing the data and just having very simple interfaces that are dealing with that. And you're taking care of those CRUD ops, you have forms for adding and deleting and all these things. So with that in mind, I am moving the focus of this for now, I will say, I'll preface that and say for now, to being something more like an admin portal, where we really are going to just be focused on the way that the data is manipulated. Everybody check your mics. So then right now we have this artworks, right? And I kind of moved everything where there's like a secondary bar here to have all of the forms that kind of belong, or, any links that belong to this section. So this is where, once we make this persistent, we will always have things here. And then the add art form is here, delete art is here. So this is kind of the direction we're moving in. And as we make this a little bit more complex, we have additional classes, additional areas with artists and exhibitions and styles. We'll have, more of these kind of, this kind of organization. And then if I can pull it off, I would still love to have a more front-facing, portion of this website that would be like something that only the people who don't have an admin role would see this part. And that would be where we make things really, really pretty and, think about kind of the user experience. Because here's the thing, while we are focused in Unit 2 on data, when you get to Unit 3, you're going to be working on a capstone project and you're going to be thinking about all of it. You're going to be thinking, most of you are going to be creating apps that are public, like facing, like your user, probably your primary person that is your audience for your app is going to be, not a technical person, right? You're going to be creating these apps with lots of interesting things to do. Now, you may also have some of the kind of admin portal type things built into your app for this kind of purpose. It just kind of depends on what you're going for and how much you can get done in the space of 8 weeks. But it's important, I think, for you to be thinking about how that all fits together. So I'm going to focus on the data administration part, for the rest of this, but I also would like to try to provide it as an example of here's what it looks like when you might have a little bit of both, because, these things really are multidimensional. So that's kind of where we're going. So I've kind of rearranged how I've done this just to clarify that, so that we are very much, intentionally focused on this side of things for now. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, cool. All right, so now that I've explained all of that, we can just like jump into it and do it when we get there. Okay, so we're going to be talking about setting up your database for use with a Spring app, the concept of object relational mapping, specifically how to connect your Spring Boot app to your MySQL database once you have it created. And then we'll talk about this idea of repositories as a data layer and entities for your model classes. Okay, so with your database, you want to set up not just a schema, but also a user. And this is all walked through very wonderfully by Chris Vey and videos in your chapter. I am not going to go into a huge amount of detail about this because he already does such a great job. I'd rather spend time on the code. So, excuse me. So on the login tab, when you go to this user and privileges section in administration, you can see you kind of got, the login. You want to set the hosts matching to local hosts since you're just running it locally on your computer, and then set a password and confirm it. And then you apply that. I didn't say that on here, but apply it first and then switch over to the schema privileges. In the past, I've found that can make a difference. And then you go to add entry and you choose your schema. So in this case, I've got the schema gallery. So I, chosen it here. And then you also do the select all for the permissions to kind of give them all the privileges. And by them, I mean you, because you are your own user. So that's pretty much all there is to that. And, I can kind of show you over in here. I already have this set up because I didn't want to lose my data. So I've got, over in here in administration, this is the users and privileges here. And you can see that I've got that gallery user set up here with the privileges. And the add entry button is here. The select all button is here. So yeah, it's all walked through in your chapter. So I already did it, but I wanted to just at least cover it for a minute, just so you have some context for that. So now, I'll be able to use this. Okay, so let's talk about object relational mapping as a concept for a second. The deal is that Java and MySQL can't communicate on their own. So, but they need to work together, right? So object relational mapping is this, this tool, essentially, it's a method, a technique of connecting Java objects to relational databases. And your objects, of course, are based on your models. And the relational database has tables. And I'm sure you already have seen how that all kinds of lines up, right? With all of the different fields and everything. So the important part is being able to make it where they can communicate. So there's kind of two pieces to this. A JPA, Java Persistence API, kind of handles the big picture of looking at your data layer and models and how it all fits together. And then there's a mapper. And the mapper just looks at these model classes and says, okay, how do I set up the tables according to the way that these model classes have been defined? So those two things together, we're going to use the Spring Data JPA for the API, and we're going to use Hibernate for mapping. And it's all just kind of built in. It's going to be really actually much easier than it sounds, I promise. It sounds like we're doing something really big and epic here, and we are. This is a bold move, setting up a persistent database. But the steps that we have to take to get there, it's actually not that big of a deal. We're going to be making very small changes to a few key areas of our code, and boom, it's going to happen because Hibernate is magical. And it does lots of amazing things. Okay. All right, so let's take a look here at the connection portion of this. So there's basically two dependencies that you need to add. Your book will give you a different one for the MySQL one than I have. So I found that, and I don't know if it's because of my version of Java, because I'm using a version 17 for this project, or what, but I actually went to start .spring.io. This is how I figured it out. I went here and I kind of selected what my selections were for my my choices, and then I came in here and I looked because it kept giving me it kept saying that my MySQL stuff wasn't going to work. And I was like, well, what driver is actually available if I come here, right? And so I did this, and then I hit this explore button here, and it brought up a copy of the build.gradle file that will be created with whatever I've selected so far. And that's when I saw this, and I saw, aha, runtime only, and it's got this completely different dependency that's coming from Maven Central. So I switched it out and I used this one instead, and that is, it worked perfectly. So That's a great way for you to find out, depending on what your selections are. Wow, I did not mean to do that. Go back. Oh no. Okay, hold on. I am all over the place. Yeah, here we go. Oh my God. There we go. Okay. Yes. So just make sure that you've got the one that works for your combination of all the things. And then you should be good to go. You typically will have to rebuild things. You can come down here to the, the build. Yeah, okay, thanks. Come down here to the build thing and just hit this refresh button to reload it once you've put this stuff in place. And that should take care of it. So you can see here in my build.gradle file, I've got, those two things added, the Spring Boot starter data JPA and the MySQL connector J are the ones that I ended up using. Okay, and then the second part is configurations that are in the applications.properties file. So this is actually probably easier for you to read on here than it is in here. So there's 5 different sections. Chris does an amazing job of really explaining this in detail. And I'm not going to take the time to do that because he's already done it so well for you. So if you're curious about how this works, he even demonstrates for you what happens when you change this to true so that you can see some of the logging happen and stuff. So definitely go check out that video if you haven't. Say it was like 17.3 point something. Maybe you'll notice here that I've got these environmental variables set. There's also a link to a page in Launch Code where they walk you through how to do that step by step. And I highly recommend this because you do not want your stuff end up being in your public GitHub repository online. You want to keep that stored within IntelliJ so that all that you actually see in the code is this, very generic. So, you can get that set up and you just go to get that configuration started. You just come up in here and go to edit configurations. And then you can see here, you can click on this little $sign here and it brings up the pane where you can add them one at a time. So like, yeah, I've got everything here. And now you know my password. Okay, it's okay though, because it's local to my computer. It's not like any of you can break in, unless you want to come and break into my house and use my machine, but you're not going to do that. But still, good practice is to, yeah, right, Nathan. Good practice is to always use the environmental variables and not just have them hard-coded right here. So take the time to set that up. It takes less than 5 minutes. Okay, so that's all you got to do for that. And then once you do that, it knows where to go. It's got the host, it's got the port, it's got your database name, it's got the username and the password. It has everything it needs to connect to your database once you have all of the stuff in your code in place to initialize that. So that brings us to the next topic. In order to convert your project to start to be able to use a database for storing the data, the first aspect of this is repositories. So when I say repositories, I'm not talking about Git, right? It's the generic concept of a repository is a place where you put stuff, a place where you deposit things. And for Git, of course, we have these repositories that are where we're storing all the different versions of our code. For an MVC project, a repository is the place where you build a data layer to manage the storage of the data in conjunction with the database. Okay, so this concept of a data layer is not new to you because we actually already simulated this. We had this, temporary, if you remember over here, this temporary data layer class we created called, artwork data. It gave us a hash map, a place to store things. We had these little kind of CRUD operation static methods we wrote, add and find by ID and get all and remove. So we kind of simulated this. But now that we are actually hooking up to a real database, we're going to do it much more simply. So all we have to do is replace that file with something else, and that's going to be a repository. So A repository is a Java interface, and it inherits from CRUD repository, which is an interface that has a bunch of cool stuff built into it. Got all these methods, and the most common ones are find all, find by ID, save, delete by ID. We'll be using all of those in short order. So that all sounds great, right? So you're thinking, okay, so I have to go in and have to code a whole bunch of things. You really don't have to code a whole bunch of things. Spring takes this. Now these are interfaces, right? So your repository is inheriting from the CRUD repository interface. But then we're actually going to be using it as an object in the controller. And you're like, I mean, Chris kind of explains this too, but like, how is that possible when you can't actually create objects from interfaces? It's because Spring is doing magical things behind the scenes, and it's going to create that class kind of on the fly. And so it'll implement the interface for you. So all you have to do is set up this interface, and it does the rest. So to do this, you're going to create it in the data package. So you can see kind of in this directory here, you see my old, data layer class that we created, artwork data. That we were using for simulating this. And then that's exactly where we create the artwork repository interface. So if we have a class called artwork, and that's the object that this repository is going to store, then we call it artwork repository. That's the naming convention. Use the extends keyword because it's inheriting, one interface is inheriting from the other. And then you have to give CRUD repository 2 arguments. It actually takes arguments. So the first parameter is, what class of the object is going to be stored. And of course, in this example, it's artwork. And the second part is, what is the auto-boxed data type, the wrapper class for your data type for your primary key. And of course, that's going to be an integer. So you can see I've got this set up, artwork repository extends CRUD repository with artwork being the class of the object that's going to be stored, and integer being the type of the primary key. That's it. And when I say that's it, because you'll notice there's a left bracket there and there's a right bracket there, and there's absolutely nothing in between them. That is correct, ladies and gentlemen. We do not have to do any more coding because CRUD repository is amazing and it has everything built in. So this actually is super simple to do. So let's go over and do it. So I'm going to come over here to my data package, and I'm going to say new class and then change it to be an interface here. And I'm going to say artwork repository. Yes. Let me double check to make sure I'm in the right. Yes. Okay. All right, so, and you can see this says interface. Now, if you forget to select interface, you can change this. It'll say class here, and you can just change it to interface, and that'll work. So again, we're going to just say extends and then CRUD repository. And you can see that's been added as an import now, but we have to finish this. So we have to give it artwork, and we have to give it integer. So that's it. There is one more thing, and I totally failed to put this on here. I'm sorry. I'll add this to the slide later. There's also an annotation. You want to add the repository annotation. This marks this for the JPA that this is going to function in this capacity. So you just have to kind of tag this as a repository, and then it'll be able to do the rest. So I just forgot to put that bullet point on here, but that is actually, you can see that it's here. I should have actually explicitly mentioned it, but okay, so that's it. We now have an artwork repository. So then it's like, okay, how do we use it, right? Because we still have these other, like over in our controller, we've got everything is still being referenced by just using the static methods we wrote from artwork data. So we're going to come in here and we're going to take care of all of that. So when you update the controller, the first thing you do is to declare this private variable, and you use the repository interface as the type, and then you give it the same exact name, just with camel case in terms of naming the variable. So, and then I didn't put the bullet point in here, but you can see that there's this auto wired annotation. So this is, again, going to communicate, wire this thing up, take care of all kinds of fancy things behind the scenes. And this is the object that you're working with. So this, private artwork repository, this is now an object that is created from a class that is implementing the interface of your repository, artwork repository. But we're not having to do very much work to make that happen. And then everywhere we previously used the static methods from the temporary data layer class we wrote, we can just switch it out and start using that artwork repository and calling those CRUD repository methods that are built into that parent interface. So, find all and save and all these other ones that I was mentioning. So that really is all we're going to have to do. So we'll come over here to our artwork controller. I'm going to start at the top here, and we're going to say, private, and then artwork repository, and then auto wired. That's the annotation it gets. And now we have this. We have an object that will be of the class that's implemented from that interface. And then we can actually start to use it. So I can copy this and come down here and say, okay, let's say instead of using that other class, but get all is actually not the name of the CRUD repository method, it's find all. So we're going to use find all. There we go. And I know we have another instance of this further down, so let's go see if we can find that. Artwork data right here. So we're going to replace that. And then we have an artwork data.add here. So instead of that, we're going to say artwork repository and then .save and pass in that artwork object. And then the fourth one is for deleting. We had this method we had written called remove. Instead, artwork repository is going to use the CRUD repository method delete by ID. And you'll notice that there is a delete if you were passing in the entire artwork object, but we're not. We're just giving it the ID. So we want to use delete by ID. Okay, so that's it. I just replaced, all four places in here where these needed to be, we now need to say use the database instead of using this little, temporary class we've got over on the side that is not persistent, but this is persistent because it's going to be connected to the database. Okay, before I move on, does anybody have any questions about what I just did? Nope. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it really is this straightforward. And, this is a fairly straightforward example just because we've got just one class we're working with right now. And we've got some very, very basic operations that we're doing, these CRUD operations. So that's pretty much it there. But you remember that I mentioned that the model class needs to also have some things done to it because Hibernate needs to come in here and it needs to know how to relate this to a table in the database. So there's this idea of entities, an entity class, which is just the same thing as a persistent class. Those terms are interchangeable. And basically the rule is if you have a class that's going to represent an object that's going to be stored in a relational database, then we just need to turn it into an entity class. And you're going to use the annotation entity on top of the class itself. That's the first step. And then the second step is to go to your primary key, which is usually an ID, and you want to give it two annotations for two different reasons. At ID lets Hibernate know this is the primary key. And at generated value lets Hibernate know that that ID should be automatically assigned by the database. So you remember when we were doing just SQL from scratch, we were, writing these queries and we had to use things like auto increment and primary key. This is how those things are going to get done, is because of these two annotations that are placed on the field itself. as it's declared inside your class. So again, JPA is keeping track of the big picture. Hibernate is reading through these entity classes. And so it's coming in, it's looking for these. And as long as these are in place, it's going to be able to create a table that will function the way that you need it to. When we get into chapter 18, the next two classes, we're going to be adding a lot more annotations to things, to different fields, as we are describing what the relationships between things should be, many to one to many, etc. So we'll take this a step further, but for tonight, we're just focusing on getting the application talking to the database. So this is all we're going to do. So let's come over and do this. I'm going to come up here and change this to, or not change it, but just add it to be an entity. So now Hibernate knows this is a class that should have a table. And then here on the ID, I'm going to make sure that I've got the ID annotation and also the generated value annotation. But there's one more thing to do, because we actually were kind of managing that, generation of the IDs before, right? With this next ID static variable here. So I'm going to take that out altogether. We don't need it anymore. And that also means that we don't need this. However, any entity is required to have an empty constructor. So we want to leave this here, but we don't need to call it from here. So we can simplify this all to where we just have an empty constructor, and then the primary constructor just doesn't need to reference it, but it has to be here in order for the database to be able to do its job. So that should be it for now. I mean, your getter for your ID stays here, all that stays the same. When you get into your studio tonight, you're gonna practice what it looks like to actually pull some of this stuff out into an abstract thing. And I'm not going to do that for this project during this particular lecture. I'll probably do it by the next lecture. But you're going to learn how to do it in studio tonight, and it's very easy, and it walks you right through it, and it's actually not going to take very long. So I'm not going to take the time to do that, but that would be the next step, would be when you have multiple classes, you can actually move these out of those classes so that it can inherit from an abstract class, and then share that stuff, and it kind of makes your code cleaner and easier to define everything. Okay, so we have our repository. We have made modifications to our model class. We've updated our controller to now use the repository instead of using a temporary class that has no persistence. So everything should be wired up. Let's see. Yeah. So all we have left to do is test it. All right. So I'm going to restart this. All right. And when I do, if this is working, when I come back to here, yeah, we should have some data, because I already had a table with some data in it. So you can see now we have a few artworks here from the illustrious Nathan Wright, Andrew Fisher, and Alex Jove. Just a starting point. And so we can see, everything's nicely displaying in our table. We can come over here and, if we want to delete something, we can delete it. So I could, say, let's, take this one out of here, and it's gone. And then we can come back here and I can add it back in. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to need my cheat sheet with all the information. Okay. Next identity. And that was 2021. And I also, you may notice for now, we still are using that enum for styles, but I updated it to contain the a handful of the things that are actually relevant to the artwork that I'm working with for these examples. Yeah, and then we've got that back, and we can come in and we can, add more. And so let's do silhouette, right. 2011. And okay. So yeah, and I don't know why this is happening, but every time I stop and restart my application, the database is increased, it jumps by 50 and it goes to the next thing, like 52, 102, 152. I don't know why, 202. I haven't figured that out yet. I haven't had time to look into it, but it's interesting. So that's why the ID numbers are kind of wonky. But anyway, yeah. So we've got everything kind of working the way that it was working before. But the difference is I can stop this, application, and I can restart it. And refresh this page instead of being empty and us having to start over. Oh, yeah, it's all still here. And we can come over and we can look and, update this, and we can see in our database that all the data is here, including the stuff that I just added in for the first time. So everything is working as expected, and it really took very little work to make that happen. It's kind of amazing. So I am happy to take some questions now from anybody. Anybody have any questions about that? Mina.
You added 2 new rows, right, from the front end, but I couldn't see in the table.
Yeah, so I had deleted mixed identity from where it was before, and so 202 and 203 are the 2 new ones, and they're right here.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So and right now, the style just says, these numbers that are representative of the index in the enum. But we are eventually going to have something that is more representative of kind of what we were looking at in the last SQL class, where we've got multiple tables with their own IDs. We're going to have some foreign keys that are connecting everything. So, getting into chapter 18 is where all those relationships will be built. And this is going to become a lot more complex, but a lot more interesting. And we're going to be able to do some pretty powerful things with it. So I'm kind of excited about where this goes next. Are there any other questions? Yeah, and there will be pictures because this is artwork. We will get there. Josh?
Yeah, I was just wondering, so the order that it shows in your workbench versus, well, what's on the local host, is there a reason why it's different orders or in a different order?
They are the same order as near as I can see. They're in order by ID number.
Or not by ID number, but like the column order. So
Oh yes, because when Hibernate creates the tables for you, it just puts them alphabetical.
is there any way to,
With the exception of the primary key.
is there any way to readjust it, or is that just kind of how it will be?
It's how it's going to be. Yeah. Which actually can be kind of useful. Like I've worked with databases with massive amounts of columns and information, and it can actually be kind of nice to have them alphabetical to find what you're looking for when you have lots of columns. But it's just a little bit of an adjustment. It's not what you're used to, but this is actually the way it will be. Yeah, good question. Okay, if there are any other questions about this, I'm going to start talking about Studio. Yeah, let's start here. Okay, so again, the Studio, you're going to actually create an abstract entity, but this is completely contingent on you having done the exercises on the coding events project, because now coding events isn't just about coding along during the reading portion of the chapter, and it's not even just about the exercises. We're using it in Studio now too. So if you have not done the chapter 17 exercise to add the event category class so that you have 2 classes to work with, event and event category, which is essentially a replacement for the enum that was used before. you are going to want to do that. I mean, they do provide starter code for this if you didn't, but you guys have time because this was a short lecture in an extremely short studio. Like seriously, the video for me to review this studio was like 10.5 minutes. It's short. So I know it'll take you guys longer to think it through and to do it. But it really is not going to take the whole class. So I recommend that if you have not been doing all of the coding events stuff, that you pick a starting point that's, even if it's just the beginning of this chapter, but I would recommend that you go through the motions with the videos with Chris of doing everything that was done in this class, because the one thing this studio does not do for you is give you more practice on what I just showed you. That's actually what takes place during the code along in the chapter and during the exercises. So if you want to get that practice in so that you can do all this stuff for yourself, I mean, you can also come back later when I get my videos up and code along with me on my project, but I really recommend you do the coding events because that's kind of your core practice project for the rest of this unit. I did not mean to do that. Hold please. Okay. Yeah, so there's work to be done. It's just not what I just did for you. And so, yeah, I highly recommend it. So I'm repeating myself now, but you get the point. I really, really, really recommend you spend the time, and you've got time during the rest of this class to do it. I also recognize that some of you are going to be doing like, graded assignment demos for your TAs, possibly in part of your class time and that sort of thing too. That's fine. But this is a good way for you to make sure that you've got the basics of this down, because when we get into chapter 18 in the next two classes, it's going to get considerably more complex pretty fast. So it's a good idea to get this foundation tonight. Okay, so let's see. I do want to, yeah. So coming down the pike, we've got ORM parts 2 and 3 on Thursday and Monday, which is the first half and the second half of chapter 18. And then we'll be talking about authentication, chapter 19. And then after that, there's only one more lecture, guys. We are almost here at the end. It's amazing. So you can, come over here and take a look at the studio instructions to see about this abstract entity stuff. You also can go, backward and see, the instructions on this if you haven't done it. That is going to give you the practice on this, adding a repository, updating the controller. One note, this display all events, I don't know why they called it that. I think it's probably meant to be display all categories because that actually was what it is. I think that's a typo. But yeah, this is really, really important stuff. And it's not a ton, but it's foundational. So I'm going to stop, repeating myself now. So you guys can head off to studio. It's really early. I don't even know if your TAs are out of their meeting yet. So you might just need to jump into your group Slack, groups and just check in and see if they're ready for you yet. Otherwise, you might have a little bit of a break before you get into studio.
Meeting ended a while ago. They should be good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so does anybody else have any last questions before I go, since we have time? We good? Okay, so I will get this video processed and put up for this session. I'll get the slides up soon, and then by the end of the class, you'll have the review of the studio as well. You guys have a great night.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you.
Bye.